Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the all-new Urban Legends video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one yet again based on one of your newer suggestions. Thank you so much for those suggestions. I'll be doing a few more of these, in fact, because of the good suggestions this go around. So be on the lookout for those other videos sometime soon. This one has to do with yet another fascinating entry. In this case, something involving mysterious sounds that are located within a particular area here in the United States. I've actually done several videos in the past related to mysterious sounds throughout the world. One of them that comes to mind is the video I did on the hum, and then another one was something involving those strange sounds that came from various parts of the world, and weirdly enough, they were tied to the film Pacific Rim when it was first coming out. So I'll see if I can find the links for those videos, and then that way you'll get to enjoy those videos too if you're interested. But yes, indeed, this one has to do with a set of mysterious sounds, in this case located at Yellowstone National Park, and to this day people have no idea, no clue essentially where they're from. There's a full gamut of ranges, not just on the sounds themselves, but on possible explanation, including some of the more fascinating stuff, like some of the more paranormal and other type of otherworldly phenomenon. So definitely stuff that interested and caught my eye, and that I'll be happy to share here more in a minute. But it has to do with this. You're looking at a representation of it now. It goes by various names, but at least for this video, I'm going to go ahead and call it the Yellowstone Lake Whispers. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating info associated with these urban legends. So what is this Yellowstone Lake Whispers, or what are they essentially? First, let me talk about at least Yellowstone, where they're located at. So Yellowstone is, of course, Yellowstone National Park, a huge park, over 2 million acres, in fact, and in this case it's pretty much just all wildlife, remote areas, beautiful scenery. You can see, of course, Old Faithful and a bunch of other geothermal features there. And if you go there to this day, you'll have all of that at your leisure. I haven't been there myself. In fact, it's on my bucket list on one of these days to go there and spend some time. But who knew? Apparently, if you go to a specific set of areas there, we'll talk about more here in a minute, also a specific set of times, then there's a good chance you come across these infamous whispers. These are whispers that have been around for a long time. In fact, at least into the 1800s, in some of the first reported known encounters. And they range so much, again, involving the nature of the sounds, the locations, the frequencies associated with them. It's to this day still very, very baffling. But all of this you can find there in Yellowstone Park. So keep that in mind next time if you're going ever to that park in the future. Then you might have a chance of coming across these whispers. Now, as far as the whispers themselves and essentially what they have to do with, again, there's a huge gamut of them, but I'll talk about some as variations of them, and this is how they sound like. Some people state that they sound like bees, like imagine a large swarming of bees all coming together at once, but of course there's no bees around to make the sound. Others state that it's more along the lines of organ music, like imagine just this mysterious music, this varied music that has no rhythm to it, but it sounds at least very ethereal or ambient, and somehow it's playing in the background. That's how it sounds like. Others state that it's another musical instrument, more along the lines of a set of harps, like someone is strumming harps somewhere, and yet again, there's no explanation for that. And yet others state it sounds like more like birds, hundreds of birds, all flapping their wings all at once, all in unison. And yet, of course, when you look around, there's absolutely no birds to interpret this sound. And yet, on a more bizarre area, some people are stating that it sounds more along the lines of wire, like almost like wire, like a set of wires all strumming together, or even then metal cables, like this weird, bizarre metallic sound, almost like scraping itself or scraping against each other. And yet it's crazy considering the surroundings. Obviously, there would be nothing like that in Yellowstone Park, considering so much of the beautiful nature that's there. Why would there be a large set of cables all of a sudden making all these sounds together? So very, very fascinating when I was reading this information, along with the very type of sounds. And not only that too, but as far as the frequency, it's completely just random. You can encounter these multiple times throughout the day, or multiple times at least yourself, or you could be there at the same location and you won't see, or I'm sorry, you won't hear these sounds at all. And then on top of that, the range, the vocal range of them varies from being soft, in other words, you can still hear them, because I imagine again that with Yellowstone National Park being so still, everything is amplified. So this can be a soft background type noise, and then in other ranges, and this is where it gets more freaky, it increases more and more until it's quote unquote deafening. In fact, some of the encounters that people have stated is that yes, it is absolutely 100% deafening, and it lasts up to 30 seconds. Imagine that, like something so loud it's rumbling your ears right above you. You have no idea what's happening, where it's from, and then just like that, it's stopped, it's gone. And then that's essentially what these Yellowstone Lake Whispers are. Fascinating stuff. Again, all of that, who knew that this was happening there in Yellowstone Park? And as I was mentioning earlier, the time period, like when these things first started to be reported, it's from the 1800s, so it's been around for a long time. Actually, it's been even longer, considering more on the lines of the Native Americans that used to live there as well, and which I'll talk about more, at least in one moment, as to why there's a possible explanation for that. But at least the first written record of this comes from 1872. Apparently, there was an expedition known as the Hayden Expedition, and it was out there to survey the park's regions. Imagine that, 2 million plus acres, and here you have a small group of people that have to survey that entire area. And so when they did so, they were there and they were processing the various locations, and there was one guy there by the name of F.H. Bradley who apparently heard the sounds and he documented them. In fact, he stated this: while getting breakfast, we heard every few moments a curious sound between a whistle and a horse whine, whose locality and character we could not at first determine. So that's at least the first noted experience, the first written experience of these sounds. And then there was another, I guess you call it expedition somewhat. This was more on the lines of a project by the U.S. Fish Commission. There was a professor there by a guy by the name of Edwin Linton, who was a biology professor. And in 1892, when he was there, he stated it seemed to begin at a distance and grow louder overhead where it filled the upper air, and suggested a medley of wind in the top of pine trees and in telegraph wires, the echo of bells after being repeated several times, the humming of a swarm of bees, and 2 or 3 other less definite sources of sound. It appeared to be rather indefinite, reverberating sound characterized by a slight metallic resonance. So, my goodness, like that pretty much has everything and almost a kitchen sink all at once when it comes to all the varied sounds within that one single encounter. Crazy stuff. And yet here's another, in this case, experience, and this had to do in 1895. There was a captain by the name of Hiram Martin Chittenden, and he wrote it also because he was with the Army Corps of Engineer. He wrote what his own experience was, and he stated, a most singular and interesting acoustic phenomenon of this region, although rarely noticed by tourists, is the occurrence of strange and indefinite overhead sounds. And this is where it gets rather interesting. When I was mentioning earlier, if you wanted to have a good chance of running into these sounds, here's where you go. He says, you have long been noted by explorers, but only in the vicinity of Shoshone and Yellowstone Lakes. So right there, if you go to those Shoshone Lakes, or maybe even some parts of the Yellowstone Lakes, that's where you'll experience those sounds. And then as far as the time period, I forgot to mention this too. You have to go early in the morning. Apparently, if you're on a clear, windless day, whatever that means. I mean, how do you predict when something is going to be windless, right? But if you happen to have that particular day and you happen to be there in the winter and you happen to be there right between dawn and 10 a.m. So again, windless day in the winter, dawn and up to 10 a.m. And again, you have to be in those Shoshone or maybe Yellowstone lakes. Then that's where you'll have a good chance of encountering these. I'm going to make these notes myself, because if I end up ever going to Yellowstone National Park, you better believe I'm going to try to go to those areas. The only one that might be an issue, though, is Shoshone Lake is apparently the largest lake within the 48 states that doesn't have a road leading to it. So I don't know how one is expected to get there. It's going to be a trek, in other words, but it might be worth the actual experience, because if you get there and you follow all that criteria, then yes, you'll be able to have an encounter with these whispers, or at least a good chance associated with them. There's more experiences that I was reading too, but I'll save some of those maybe for another video, or if you wanted to read them on your own, it's out there too. The thing is, they all pretty much state the same. Like, people are stating it's either more on the lines of metallic sound or swarm of bees or some other type of ambient type music. It's that strange phenomenon that seems to be happening to multiple people at different times, and yet it's very similar to one another. Now, as far as the ideas, like essentially what causes these things, let's talk about more on the realistic side. There's one notion that it could be temperature inversions, where apparently cool, like let's say if you take the water, average water in the lakes, there's the cool area above it. I'm sorry, the cool area below the water, and then the warm area above it. And apparently when they mix together, it could cause some kind of weird sounds. And then another phenomenon has to do with this. Apparently there's earthquakes that happen within Yellowstone National Park. And when that happens, they happen deep within the ground. And essentially the areas there, like the caves or underground caverns that are scattered all throughout that location, they muffle these things, or they create an almost a twisted sense of sounds caused by these earthquakes and these caverns all mixed in one. And so that may be an explanation of it too. Another notion is this: so many of these mountains that are located there in Yellowstone National Park, the way the air flows down from them and then in turn gets pivoted throughout, how many regions associated there in the park, all of it creates a special type of horizontal whirlpools of air, which create these weird sounds. Like, in other words, it takes these sounds and puts them through these almost like pipes of just focused locations of sounds, and then it just goes throughout the entire region from it, and it creates these bizarre locations that just have these sounds to them. But those are more on the lines of other things. But there's even more things associated with it too, like volcanic activity, apparently glaciers that are nearby that are causing those sounds too. There could be geysers as well that just maybe haven't been visited too often or are remote, and they're creating these sounds too, and they just happen to reverberate throughout the region. It's fascinating stuff. Now, as far as the otherworldly explanations, I was mentioning that earlier. There's this. Remember, I was mentioning the Native Americans that had heard of these sounds so far long ago. Apparently, that area there is still filled with something, like something mysterious, curses maybe, but something else that the Native Americans considered sacred, and they in turn realized that there was something there within that location that created these sounds. It could be something like the lost souls, maybe people that died there within that location, and then the Native Americans realized that they've inhabited that land thereafter, or anyone that just drowns within many of the lakes, or any type of restless souls. Those could be attributed to the sounds as well. There's even the notion of this. If you want to talk about aliens and UFOs, the area there apparently is ripe of those encounters too. So who knew? I didn't know that Yellowstone National Park had a handful of UFO encounters, but there's the idea that UFOs are floating throughout those skies, and then of course with them being unseen, or in other cases being cloaked because of their advanced technology, those are the sounds that you're hearing. You just have no idea because you're not able to see the actual UFOs that are creating those sounds. So there's that too. But yes, and even then there's other ghosts and spirits that roam throughout that location. Like, apparently Old Faithful has the ghostly figure of a little boy that walks around that particular spot, and who knows, he may be creating some of the mystifying sounds there too. So very, very fascinating. No, when it comes to all this stuff, when I was reading initially this subject, this was the kind of stuff that just made me want to pick as far as why this is a very, very intriguing set of urban legends. But that's pretty much it. That's all the information that I could find that stood out when it comes to the notion of these Yellowstone Lake Whispers. If anyone has any more info, anything else I might have missed, maybe somebody that has been there before and experience them yourself, then please post those comments below. And again, if you want to get see the specific criteria that I mentioned earlier, keep that all in mind. If you want to have a good chance of running into these sounds, you have a phone, right? You have some kind of recorder with you at all times. Why not take it out? And then when you're hearing these sounds, make sure your phone is turned on to the recorder or some kind of other recorder you might have, and then that way you have a good chance of recording it and sharing it with everyone out there too. But again, if anyone has any personal experience, that's definitely something that I want to hear and then be able to share. Please do so. Put it in the comments below. So, all right, everyone, thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.